I love how we encounter two men who should be able to see, but are blind. And then two blind men who should not be able to see, but do. I love, now that I know more about it, I actually really like St. Patrick's Day, so happy St. Patrick's Day to you all. The myths and legends of St. Patrick are many, and they go all the way back, if you don't know, back to the 400 AD, around that time. Not long before Rome starts to begin its final collapse. In one of his epic stories, there was a standoff between himself and the Druids. The Druids had this incredible pantheon, and they like to have a little dash of human sacrifice on the side. But they had this entire thing, and he was at battle, they were at war. This is the legend and the myth. See, Ireland had this annual festival where, in honor of the High King, and what would happen is the High King would light his fire. And it would be this great fire, and in a little bit like a candlelight service, all the other leaders would light their torches in the king's light and pass that around until it went out. It was this huge thing that they did. But the legend goes that one day, before the king had lit his own fire, St. Patrick built this enormous fire. He came early, he built it, and they couldn't put it out. So all the servants at the king come to the king and say, we can't put out St. Patrick's fire. It's going to destroy the whole world. That's what they said. Small world in that time. We're going to destroy the whole island. And the church version of the story, or the official church version of the story, has the king admit that Patrick's source of power was greater, and so they willingly converted. Alongside of it, still for Roman eyes, is the pagan version of the story that explains that when someone has the capacity to burn down your entire island, you pretty much let them do what they want. That's power, they say. Who doesn't want that kind of firepower? Everybody wants the highest firepower. And John and James, they want that kind of firepower in their lives. They want something everyone can see, like a great pillar of fire that both seduces and warns. Now, the disciples were told they would have this place of power. Just a little week ago, Brad read it. They'd have a place, an elder seat, and being one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But that's not enough, is it? They got to be the top 2 of the 12. They want to be the ones who are going to be right next to Jesus, to be next to his throne, despite the fact that the very preceding verse, verses starting in 17 through 19, which we didn't read this morning, but right there, Jesus tells them he's going to be crucified and rise up on the third day. They just can't get this through their head about what that means. They must think he's going to go through some trials, but then at the end there's going to be this great destruction of the Romans, and it's hard to know exactly what they're thinking. But they can't see, really, they can't see his suffering. They can't see the cross clearly. They can't see the tomb because they think they are the ones who are going to make people suffer. They see themselves rise up with Jesus, but they can't see themselves in a tomb. They're not seeing clearly. They're just seeing through what Jesus is saying, and it's kind of making it fit what they want in life. And then Matthew, after that story, then Matthew goes and he tells us the story of 2 blind men who see just fine. I thought, sometimes you need to close your eyes to see. You need to shut out what you think the good life looks like. Close down what the world says feels good. And shout out for a new life. It starts, as we look at these 2 stories in a whole, let's go back to James and John. Disciples see past God to pursue their holy grail. Disciples see past God's aims to pursue their holy grail. So here we have, I don't know if you caught this detail. Here's Mama Thunder. Here is Mrs. Zebedee kneeling before Jesus to make a request. They have their mama come and do it, looks like. And he says simply, what do you want? And she uses the force. She's kneeling before Jesus, King Almighty, and she uses the force of an imperative. She uses a command, and she says, literally the word command, she commands Jesus to command that in your kingdom that my sons are on your left and right. And I see how James and John can make this mistake, but I mean, we all make mistakes like that, but to let your mom do this, it's got to invite a lifelong teasing problem. But Jesus doesn't scold them. He doesn't correct them. He doesn't tease them or her. He says, so you think you can drink from the cup that I'm about to drink? And then totally not knowing what they're saying, they say, we are able. And the classic twist of Jesus is going on here. The cup of Jesus becomes legendary, right? We know that they're pursuing this cup. And this cup, tradition says the cup that is the same cup that Jesus drank at Passover, the Holy Grail, was also the same cup that Joseph of Arimathea, no, we don't know, this isn't in the Bible, this is tradition, that Joseph of Arimathea, the one who buried Jesus in the Bible, put the cup under Jesus' side and got blood out of. And so this is part of the legend of the Holy Grail, right? This is power. And now if you drink from that Holy Grail or whatever, if you watch Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, or you read the legends and all these things, it's this cup of power that gives you power over everything. It's the kind of cup, right, that James and John want. They want this eternal life as though you drink from a cup and you're going to get it. And you get all of these things. It's a legendary myth, and some say it's in England. Some even say it's in Ireland, though I don't think that's a strong one. Others at the Vatican. Again, if you like Indiana Jones, it's at Petra. There in Jordan, being protected by a 1,000-year-old Templar, waiting for some archaeologist who has a heart to really put things right. Put them in museums, it's where it really wants to be. I love that movie, by the way. But everyone is seeking this Holy Grail. Like, if I could get my hands on that Holy Grail, I'd get my whole life together, right? And I would have power, and I'd have all this stuff. That's what the brothers essentially agree that they're seeking from Jesus. Their Holy Grail is to be next to Jesus when he's raised up. In other words, to a throne. They're not talking about raised up in resurrection. They just think raised up to a throne. The Holy Grail essentially means now it's become this word, right? The Holy Grail of this or that. It means that something that's essentially, ultimately very rare, powerful, the best, the pinnacle of some item or pursuit. Honus Wagner, when I was a baseball card, that was the Holy Grail. A baseball card just worth like $6 million now. If you're a comic book collector, you want Superman 1, right? The first edition of something is the Holy Grail of it. Dolly Parton is the Holy Grail of plastic surgery. You get the point, right? It's that thing out there that calls your name and says, you want it so bad that it becomes the focus of your life, the ideal hope. So much so that you miss Jesus and you miss what he's about. I want you to do a little exercise with me. It's very simple, and you know what it's going to lead to. But if you put your fingers about right here, and I'm going to look at the exit sign, and your fingers look invisible. So look at that, and then look way past it. Like, look at the cross. Put your fingers there. You can't hardly see your fingers, right? You see right through your fingers. They're invisible. You've done that since you were a kid, I hope. I hope this is not your first experience with it, since the kids are over there. If you do that, this is kind of what they're doing. Jesus is right there in front of them, but they're so focused on this goal, this Holy Grail that's out in front of them, that Jesus isn't actually, they're not seeing who he is. They're missing his essence. They're not focused on him, and therefore they're seeing like right through him. Yeah, he's there. He's this outline of him, but it's not powerful. It's not important. That Holy Grail being next to the Messiah and totally miss everything Jesus is doing. How many times as Christians are we right next to Jesus, or are we focused on our Bible, but we're actually thinking, how can that help me get what I want in life? How can I be powerful? Jesus, what are you going to do to make this happen in my kingdom? And we see right through him. We see right past him. We're like, we're going to use him, like James and John do here. These men are dissatisfied with Jesus because they are satisfied with this world and how it works. They just want to be on top. They're satisfied with how it works. They just want to be on top of it. What's your holy grail? Is it your kids? Is it a job? Is it control of your life? Is it everyone liking you? Being the smartest, the funniest, the richest? Maybe it's just making your bills. We don't have to always be like way up there. We're modest people. But still, it's that thing that right there goes, if I got that right, my life would be good and set. Maybe one of the hardest working. Maybe it's not having to work at all is your holy grail. Best looking. All kinds of things that quickly become that to us. When our eyes, minds, and hearts are so focused on a goal for ourselves, even a good one like being next to Jesus, we can miss the truth right in front of us for the myth of mights and maybes. Because greatness in the kingdom belongs to those prepared to serve rather than dominate. Greatness in the kingdom belongs to those prepared to serve rather than dominate. As I read this, a phrase from kind of the past sermon in the sermon series came to mind with a twist. Where two or more are gathered in their own name, there is pandemonium. Where two or more are gathered in their own name, there is pandemonium. Now, I'm reminded of the common cult of togetherness that we're experiencing in our world today. There was this point of isolation, best to be apart. Now bears go, we need togetherness. Like we need this strong forces. We need to gather people, right? And as people are isolated and alone, they seek togetherness, a bonding to accomplish things, share feelings, life experiences. But we want togetherness. But that could be an idol in and of itself. That's pretty destructive. These brothers came together and were pretty destructive. Then the 10, they come together and they kind of go, well, we're going to stand against you, 2 verses 10. What you going to do, right? I mean, this is almost a preamble for what's going to happen if Jesus leaves the situation like this and dies, and this church is going to be fractious from the very beginning. But not one of them could clearly think for themselves because they were so bound up and coming together for their own sakes. And as the 2 come together in front of Jesus, they come in their name for me and mine. And the world makes allies to dominate. That's what's happening in this section. The other disciples are livid at the audacity of those who want to rise above them. And that's kind of how we would all think. I mean, this is not exceptional. This is ordinary. And I can imagine them saying, what do you think you've done to earn that? You even had to have your mama come and ask for it. Right? You can see the insults and mama insults, like it were the 1990s, coming back and forth, right? This is what would be happening. His correction is straightforward and it's to the point. Rulers of this world, they lord power over people to control them. But greatness in God's kingdom is a servant. Jesus isn't going to get caught up on taking sides. Every time you get in an argument with somebody, you always think everyone thinks God's on their side. God's not interested on whose side you're on. He's interested on, are you being a servant? Each and every one of you. And a servant leader. So he's calling these men to be leaders. A servant leader ends up serving Jesus first. That's what it means to be in his name. That's what it means to be a servant leader in the church. It doesn't mean that I just go around as a servant leader and serve everyone's needs without knowing that I am doing all of these things as a servant of him. A head servant serves Jesus, and he teaches everyone around him to serve Jesus. That's what it's about. It's not a service industry where you have people who are the consumers and the servant, the service action. It's all in service to him. And that's what he's getting at. These guys want to make the other 10 disciples under them, their servants, to serve them, prop them up. They're thinking in the same way the world works around them. And it goes back to the cup. Jesus takes this back to the cup, so to speak. Let's kind of think about that. Jesus, he says, he's going to be a ransom for many. That means his blood is going to pay for everyone that follows and believes in him. And Jesus told them, you will drink my cup, but essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, but your selfish ambitions aren't mine to grant. See, the Old Testament prophets, they speak real darkly about the cup of the Lord's wrath. Isaiah 51:17, you can look that up, and there's other places. Look up the cup. Then there's a cup of anointing and other cups, but Jesus is referencing this cup in Isaiah. When God, and it says, I'm going to kind of give you an understanding. This is from Isaiah. It's kind of a summary. God grants the wicked, the violent, and the bloodthirsty the reward for their ways. And it's as though wrath is turned into wine, and Israel is forced to drink to the dregs, which is what it says in Isaiah 51:17. They're forced to drink to the dregs the wrath of God, who really loves the humble and the weak. Jesus comes along and says, I am true Israel. I am going to be the one who drinks the cup of wrath to the dregs. I'm going to take it all. I'm going to drink fully from this cup. I'm going to take the wrath of God upon myself and free everyone else. And they're asking to drink from the same cup from which he drinks. They don't know what they're asking. And he says, yeah, okay, you can drink from the cup, which is transformed into you'll suffer too. You can suffer for other people too. He gave his life that we might have life, but he calls us also then to do what? Take up our own cross, to suffer as well, to die to ourselves, and serve others in his name. That's what it looks like to drink from his cup. That's what the Holy Grail is. It's not where you go get your power. The real Holy Grail is when you die to yourself, you give everything to God, and you surrender and you live for others. If you're searching for the Holy Grail in your life, that thing that would focus on to bring you fullness, that is only found in Jesus Christ and surrendering your life to him. Where two or more are gathered in his name, there Jesus is. And so is unity. Jesus has taken these 12 roaring disciples and he brings them back around himself. Do you see that? This is essentially what's happening here. He's bringing them back and gathering to himself. And he's bringing into them the concept of service rather than domination. This doesn't look like power in any way they've ever seen it. And then he's going to hammer it home on his way to Jerusalem. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He's going into Jericho. And the greatest disciples see the greatness of Jesus. During this Passion Week that we're going to be, as we move toward Easter, and the Passion Week that's just ahead of him here, because he's on his way to Jerusalem. This is the last story before, in Matthew, before, what's next week called? All of a sudden it's out of my head. Palm Sunday. So this is the last story before what we call Palm Sunday. And so he's giving them this sort of last vision of what he expects. And Jesus from that point will start to look increasingly impotent, not strong. And then, I was thinking during our greatest trials, it does seem that Jesus may not have lived up to everything he claims. But there were two blind men who saw it differently. These two blind men have probably been living a life of begging, and they simply cry out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. They know who it is. They believe who it is. The crowd told them to shut their traps, right? Shut up over there. We're trying to get what we want, right? Shut your trap. He's the king. Don't talk to him. You're not worthy of this encounter. But they kept yelling until Jesus turned and asked them the same basic question that he asked Mama Zebedee. They responded with, Lord, we want our eyes to be opened. And it was though Jesus made what was spiritually true, physically true. He opens their eyes. He reaches out, touches them so they could see. Why did he do that? It's kind of obvious here in this text. If you look at it, why did he do that? So they could follow him. Why do you ask what you ask of Jesus? Why do you ask for what you want and need? Is it so that you can go follow your own dreams? Or that you can follow him? They could simply see because their eyes were closed. They hadn't seen power that made them lust after it. It seems their suffering has made them dissatisfied with the status quo, just as dissatisfied as Jesus. They hadn't seen a world so big that that God couldn't claim it. They didn't have that perception. They couldn't earn anything. They just wanted to follow. They didn't see a throne that they had desired their whole lives. No, they needed a guide. They didn't need to be trusted. They needed somebody to trust. They had no illusions of living up to the significance of the moment, but knew the moment was not too big for God. He is the great giver of good to his people. Their calling is our calling. Follow Jesus, which means fixing our hearts and our minds upon him, making him the vision of our future, the outcome of our suffering, the aim of our joy. Yet you have to take your eyes off whatever else you're following, whatever else you're pursuing, your holy grail. And I'd ask you, what in your life are you following right now? When I asked that question of myself, I had to come to wraps with a few things myself. What is it you're following? Are you following your pain? Is it making decisions for you? You're making decisions based on your pain, essentially, your tiredness, your lust, your desires, your success, your children, your spouse, your wallet. It is a great church that believes in the greatness of God. That's what makes a great community. It's not the greatness of its people. It's a church that says we're going to follow him, and we're not going to follow all these other things that keep calling and screaming our name. We're a mess without him. We might see his greatness work in people, but the church must keep this in mind always. Here's what I really love about this story and this set of stories, is the simplicity of caring for a few blind beggars on the side of the road, despite the fame and glory that might have come by blowing up something or healing important people. Jesus met them at their need in this very basic place. In the time of St. Patrick, in the Roman Empire, as they had just merged about 100 years before, the Roman Christian leaders believed a people had to become civilized or Roman enough to become Christian. So they'd go into a place, they would teach everybody how to live, which was essentially Roman. They called it Christian, and then they would call it Christian and say, okay, you've been Christianized. Here's some Jesus. That was their basic way of handling it. And once they were sufficiently civilized, they could be called Christians and learn how to, essentially, they'd also be Romans. There was no real need for St. Patrick, though, to show and go do this. He didn't go and he didn't show pillars of fire. It's a myth. Nor 5 4-leaf clovers are not that important. It's not what really gave St. Patrick his name and his importance. What he really did, let me tell you what he really did. It's a lot more boring. He learned their way of life. He knew their language because he had been their slave. He taught them that though their gods wanted them to sacrifice their children, the real God sacrificed his own son for them. He helped them with daily living. He taught them about God's goodness by building communities of love and teaching them to build things together. He would go out with the fishermen at the beginning of the day, and he would pray for a good day's catch. Wow kind of stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff we can do. Simple things. In 4:30 or so, this is why he's important. And it really is important. I didn't know this till not long ago, but in 4:30 or so, he was the first European leader to speak against slavery. We're talking 400 AD. And within his lifetime, or right soon afterwards, the Irish slave trade stopped. And all other forms of violence, such as murder and warfare, were significantly reduced and decreased to almost not existing. To people really, truly not needing their swords and just needing their plows. This isn't a demonstration of worldly power that people like to remember. It just doesn't stick in the brain. But a memory of what happens when people, this is what happens when people come together in the name of Jesus. He goes on in Matthew to tell us that goes on in Matthew to tell us that it's about feeding the poor, helping the destitute, the ones who no one else sees, we're supposed to see. That's what it means to have greatness in the kingdom. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter where you've come from. It doesn't matter what state of humiliation that you may find yourself, have found yourself, or will find yourself. God sees you. What do? You call out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And he will.